Hey, I'm JA Kerswell from Hysteria Lives and the Hysteria Continues podcast, and I'm back this time to discuss even more 80s slasher movies that never were. Although the wrinkle this time is that some of these were made but are still missing in action, so keep watching to find out more. First of all, to answer the obvious question, why did so many of these projects simply vanish? Well, the early 1980s horror slasher boom is well known, but what isn't so well remembered is its quick bust. As soon as the onslaught started, the subgenre outside of the emerging franchises started rapidly burning itself out. Simply put, attracted by the hopes of big profits for little investment and no reliance on star names, every producer in Hollywood, not to mention Texas, Ohio and everywhere else for that matter, was attracted to the splatter for cash bandwagon. Whilst many turned to profit, the market got so oversaturated that before the advent of video as a mass market, many genre and subgenre films simply sat on the shelf for up to 2, 3 or more years before they secured theatrical distribution. The other effect of this gore rush and bust was that a good number of slasher films were announced, sometimes started and perhaps tantalisingly finished, but never saw the light of day. In 1980, it was reported that 84 horror movies were shot in North America and Canada. That rose to 110 in 1981. However, in 1982, 140 horror films were announced, but only 45 were actually made. So join me now as we once again take a deep dive into the murky depths of more lost slashers of the 1980s, starting with a trip to Lover's Lane. Obviously, not to be confused with the 1999 post-Scream slasher starring a pre-fame Anna Faris, the announcement for Lover's Lane first appeared in Box Office magazine in October 1980. It was listed as an upcoming production from Cannon Films. Now, this was a busy time for the Golan Globus trash powerhouse, which had felt confident enough in the burgeoning success of their exploitation and horror library to take out 6 full pages advertising upcoming titles and boasting current successes in variety. Featured titles included slashers X-Ray, aka Hospital Massacre, and New Year's Evil. Another page boasted the box office success of Cannon's then just released Schizoid, which was listed as grossing over $4 million in its first month of release, over about $12 million in today's money. The bottom half of that page announced a title called Lover's Lane, featuring a silhouetted image of a man holding a knife looming over a car with a necking couple inside. Given its company, it seemed that this was going to be another slasher schlockbuster title for Cannon. So one thing that stands out is its proposed star Wayne Newton, known as the Midnight Idol, Mr. Las Vegas and Mr. Entertainment, amongst other titles. Newton was one of the best known entertainers in Las Vegas at the time. Would he become Cannon's latest slasher villain? Well, it's not such a stretch given that only a few years later Frankie Avalon would chase a teenage Donna Wilkes around with a hatchet and blood song. Jack Jones had battled a side-wielding killer in the Hag Mask in Pete Walker's 1978 movie, The Comeback, and even a pre-famed David Bowie was considered for a role in the 1969 proto-slasher The Haunted House of Horror. So would Newton really have been such a strange choice to play against type? Press reports suggested he'd also sing in the movie as a nightclub performer by day and a psycho by night. Now, it was perhaps surprising in a time when dates and locations were used as a hook for many a slasher that Lover's Lane, and especially the urban legend of the hook, had not already been utilised more widely. However, it's sometimes unclear in press reports whether Newton would be stabbing or strangling teenagers. Either way, he was due to menace Lover's Lane. But what of the time it was in pre-production? Well, as I've already mentioned, the common misconceptions about the slasher boom of the late 1970s and early 1980s was it was just that, a sustained boom. Christian Williams in the Washington Post exclaimed, "This autumn of 1980 will be remembered in Hollywood as a season when horror movies, those unspeakable celluloid things, cracked out of their pods en masse to gorge anew on the wallet of American filmgoers. It was a veritable slasher gold rush and a fertile ground for fledgling slasher projects. But as with any boom, it's tricky to know when it will bust." Even as early as the release of Terror Train in October of that year, major studios who measured the success of a picture against the joint Halloween and Friday the 13th box office juggernauts expressed disappointment with their returns. Genre barometer Roger Corman even cancelled a horror film and said that the market would be oversaturated by spring the following year. However, it wasn't time to write off the subgenre totally just yet. Filmway said that a third of the 150 scripts they received each month were still for horror films. AFCO Embassy said the number of similar proposals was uncountable. In November of 1980, whilst the Washington Post declared the decline of the horror movie's fortunes, it admitted that Lover's Lane, amongst others, would soon join the likes of Friday the 13th and Prom Night in throbbing like abscessed teeth in the gaping maws of the nation's multiplex theatres. The ever-reliable World Weekly News stated Las Vegas heartthrob Wayne Newton wants to be a movie superstar. The entertainer has signed on to play a nutsy murderer in Lover's Lane, although the same issue detailed how Faye Dunaway was supposedly being haunted by the vengeful ghost of Joan Crawford on the set of Mommie Dearest. Perhaps she'd seen the rushes. Curiously, and perhaps hinting at production troubles, even as late as March of 1981, Lover's Lane was still being announced around the time it was originally due for release. Press reports said that Newton would star opposite Marissa Berenson, and the film would debut at Cannes Film Festival that year. So, was it ever made? Well, the truth is that reels of Cannon's Lover's Lane celluloid are not lying waiting to be discovered in some long-forgotten dusty corner. Sadly, the cameras, well, they would have rolled had it not been for some ill-timed legal issues. The film fell through after NBC ran a story in 1980 that linked Newton to organised crime and spooked investors. Newton sued for defamation and won, but the damage was done. Billy Fine, a Hollywood film distributor who'd put out such films as I Spit on Your Grave and Penitentiary 2, and was also an executive producer on Cannon's New Year's Evil, testified that those putting up the money were spooked by it all. He said, "We had a very conservative group of investors. Image-wise, we didn't want any problems or hassles. They wanted a clean deal. Presumably, the idea of Wayne Newton donning a fedora and carving up teens met with their approval, whilst the whiff of alleged criminal activity frightened them off. Newton won the case and was awarded damages." In 1986, Fine said he now had his own money and would love to make the film with Newton, but by that time the slasher bandwagon had long left town and Lover's Lane was safe from knife-wielding maniacs for a few years yet. Next up is one film that does exist, but has been missing in action since its regional early 80s cinema release. Silent Death was shot by director Vaughn Christian in Elizabeth, Union and Freehold, New Jersey, in the spring-summer of 1982, with some footage potentially being shot earlier in 1981. Now, one of the very few people to actually have seen the movie was Gore Gazette's Rick Sullivan during its week-long run at Paramount Theatre in Newark, New Jersey on February the 18th of 1983. He said it was an almost unwatchable slasher, black exploitation police drama about a masked assailant who is carving up members of an organised crime gang with a straight razor. He called it a 69-minute sub-Z abomination with constantly out-of-focus camera, inaudible sound and cheesy-looking orange blood. Sounds great to me. More details emerged in a recent blog titled In Search of Newark's Greatest Lost Grindhouse auteur, the Vaughn Christian story, which is well worth a read. In an interview with Christian, it details how the director was working at the Paramount Theatre and inquired how he could get a film shown there. He was told that if it was in 35mm, there was a good chance it would be. In the interview with that blog, Christian said that Silent Death was about a woman who was seeking revenge against a group of businessmen who killed a family when she was a child, and she goes a little psychotic, puts on masks and terrorises them. There's a couple of detectives trying to solve the case, one falls in love with her. The local mayor in Elizabeth, Thomas Dunn, was roped into a role in the film playing a bodyguard. Bizarrely, a local press report in November of 1982 said that he was inspired by his role to collar a real-life criminal who stole a car. Silent Death was blown up from 16mm to 35mm and the cinema manager was good to his word. Christian hints that maybe a few mom and pop stores also got copies of the film in New Jersey, but no copy has yet surfaced, and so far no boutique label has secured rights to release it. This death remains silent for now. And here's another one that does exist but has also been missing in action for 45 years. Dark Water is a UK lens slasher short with a running time of around 28 minutes and was seemingly inspired by John Carpenter's Halloween. It would have been shown as a pre-feature film, as was common practice in British cinemas back then. It has not been seen since. Now, the synopsis sounded intriguing. In order to enjoy a romantic private swim together, Joe and Eddie hide when their local swimming pool is closing for the evening, but unbeknownst to them, a killer is on the loose and in the building with them. Halliwell's film guide reviewing the film said, "A girl locked in a swimming pool is terrorised by a mad killer, agreeably watchable thriller full of shadows and shocks." The young couple were played by stars to be Phil Davis, who had then just wrapped Quadrophenia and went on to other films including Alien 3, and Gwyneth Strong, who's probably best remembered as Cassandra Trotter in the British TV comedy Only Fools and Horses. The BBFC website lists the film as being from 1979 with a AA certificate, which would have meant at the time that no one under 14 would have been admitted. It would have been shown in British cinemas from 1980 onwards. Now, a couple of other British horror shorts with definite slasher movie nods from the late 1970s are available to view on YouTube. Panic from 1978 has a young woman menaced by a creepy serial killer after she offers them a lift. And then there's 1979's The Dumb Waiter, which was also strongly influenced by the slasher films from the United States at the time, where another young woman battles a psychopath as he tries to break into a flat. Both of them are very much recommended. Now for another lost slasher that disappeared into the night, never to be heard of again. So back on October the 15th, 1980, cinema news magazine Variety featured a double-page advert for an upcoming project called Night Intruder. The somewhat abstract image is a little hard to make out, but it appears to feature a distant tree line in silhouette around a body of water, perhaps purposefully reminiscent of a certain crystal lake. The title itself seems to be shaped like a knife, and given that 1980 was awash in slasher productions, it isn't such a stretch to think this may have been one too. Now, intriguingly, Christopher Mankiewicz is listed as producer. He went on to write and produce the early 80s slasher Fatal Games, which was lensed in 1982 under the title The Killing Touch. Prolific TV actor Richard Klein, who is probably best known for Three's Company, was listed bizarrely as director. Ibrahim Musa, ex-husband of Natasha Kinski, was listed as an executive producer. However, nothing close to this title appears in any of their filmographies. The Variety spread also lists Lindsay Harrison, Arlene Vrell and Thomas R. Myers as the writers of Night Intruder. Harrison was the most prolific of the three and went on to write the comedy Fraternity Vacation, which was released in 1985. Vrell is so obscure there's only a single entry for her name on the whole of the internet. However, again intriguingly, that single entry mentions a project that the three writers were working on. This is listed as A Stranger is Waiting. Now, could this be an AKA for Night Intruder? It doesn't appear to be connected to the Sean S. Cunningham's A Stranger is Watching, which was released in 1982, which was based on a novel by Mary Higgins Clark. However, as Cunningham was already in talks to direct that film as early as July of 1980, the title may have been deemed too similar and changed to Night Intruder. At the time, Cunningham was debating following up Friday the 13th with A Stranger is Watching, or another project, The Witness, about a nurse who witnesses a murder in a hospital, which is another MIA unrealised title. Now, the fact that there's such scant information about this project and no listed production company suggests that it never went before cameras, feasibly because it failed to attract financial backing, often the purpose of advertising in the film press. Night Intruder was never featured in Variety again, and its fate remains a mystery. Next up, missing in action slasher would have been An Eyeful, Blind Date from 1982. No, not the Nico Mastoraka shocker from 1984. This eyeball mangler was reportedly in the vein of My Bloody Valentine and Friday the 13th. Greg Canham, who provided special effects work on the slasher Curtains and a good number of other movies, seems to have already been hard at work on this film. However, it doesn't appear on IMDb at all. In an interview with Fangoria magazine, Canham elaborated. He said effects include an eye slitting similar to the one done in The Sentinel by Dick Smith. He said that Dick Smith had been very helpful to him with this effect. He said he asked his help and he'd been just great. He also said there are other eye-related atrocities too, hence the title. He said another gruesome effect to look forward to is a new twist on Hitchcock's shower sequence in Psycho, only this time it won't be water that comes out of the faucet, but acid. It's Canham's job to create the effect believably, said the interview with Fangoria. Now, intriguingly, the way Canham discusses the movie, it sounds as if the special effects work was well underway. Copyright records show that a movie under the title of Blind Date was registered in both 1980, including a fifth draft registered in May of that year, and 1982. Sadly, that is where the trail goes cold. However, for our last lost slasher, this one did get made and is out there somewhere. So to end, we have a lost slasher movie that very much exists and even has a sequel, but both remain firmly missing in action. So, a killer in an Einstein mask sporting pink rubber gloves is killing members of a horror film society. It's no legend. It actually happened, well, on videotape at least. Many of us lucky enough to be teenagers in the latter part of the 1980s, made slasher movies with our friends on our parents' hulking camcorders, watched once to much amusement and never seen again. Carnage Hall and even its mooted sequel can be traced to a late 1980s student production at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. A synopsis exists on IMDb. A mad killer is loose, preying on the residents of the coolest male dormitory ever. The film was directed by students under the banner of Rimshot Productions. The group, who also appear in the film and are listed as playing themselves, were part of the self-named The Carnage Committee, a horror film society in the Tom Brown Hall of Residence. They told a local newspaper that after seeing 500 terror movies, they could make a better one themselves. The makers admit that the film started as a bit of fun, but soon turned into something of an obsession. In September of 1988, one of the students told the campus newspaper, TCU Daily Skiff, it became a personal vendetta to finish Carnage Hall. The piece describes the film as a 75-minute horror comedy and led with the tagline, "The men at Tom Brown thought horror was funny, they were dead wrong." With only a $200 budget, 3/4 of which went on videotape, the film was intended as a self-referential slasher parody with a killer sick of his fellow dorm mates watching horror movies and who decides to kill them off one by one. They aim to find original ways to kill the cast with DIY special effects including sausages wrapped in latex doubling as crushed fingers. They quipped all of our FX was edible. Deaths included an impalement, a TV antenna and pushed through an eye socket, a couple scalded to death in a shower, and even someone being forcibly drowned in their own vomit. With a canny eye on the publicity, the makers roped in the film critic, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and a cable TV writer to appear as a pair of bumbling cops. Although the film had its premiere at the university to an audience of around 300 people in May of 1988, and despite a semi-professional poster existing, the film has largely remained unseen since. The reason for this is probably because it uses musical scores from existing horror movies by people like John Carpenter, John Williams and Danny Elfman. In other words, it could never be released commercially unless a whole new score was added. In December of 2016, there was a showing at Carnage Hall at Hamilton's Trash Cinema in Ontario, Canada. The author of the blog says he attended and described it as such. He said, "A killer in an Albert Einstein mask dispatches the residents of a university dorm during an all-night horror movie marathon," going on further to say the whole retro self-aware horror movement is all the rage today, so it was a little surreal to see a similarly minded movie of that time. Although the members of Rimshot swore they would never make a sequel, they warmed to the idea 3 days after the film's premiere on campus. Again, telling the TCU Daily Skiff, "We looked at Carnage Hall and said, if only we could start over with the experience we have now, we could make it better." The mooted sequel was called Postmortem, The Return to Carnage Hall, and was set to feature real actors and an original soundtrack utilising local bands. Although seemingly completed, it's not known whether this sequel would have been a slasher or not. But just like the first film, it too is firmly missing in action. In my last video, I discussed the top 5 lost 80s slashers, including The Mall, Ripped to Shreds and The Graduation Party, all slasher movie projects that were planned but never made it before cameras. If you haven't seen that video, click on the link above. But that's not all. There are yet more lost 80s slashers out there, and I have another video planned to be coming soon. I'll also be in possession of a kick-ass sounding script from 1980. Yes, another lost slasher. So subscribe to my channel to be the first to catch it when it drops. For over 600 reviews and to find out more about 80s lost slashers, visit my website Hysteria Lives. So thanks for watching and I'll catch you next time.